Sound check, 1, 2.
Test, test.
We are streaming on YouTube.
Okay.
So that, and all that sounds fine. So
Okay. All right, fellow citizens, let's grab a seat. Get rolling on this. We're also broadcasting to a lot of people out there in the ether land, so the crowd is bigger than it looks in here. I'm Ed Lowing, I'm the mayor of Palo Alto, and along with the city staff, thought it would be a good idea to have this meeting today and take questions from a lot of people with respect to Fire Station 4, because we've obviously gotten a lot of comment on that over the last number of weeks. So first, I just want to go over the format. First up is going to be our city manager, Ed Shikata. And he's going to bring you up to date on the issue, including the city's plans, both short-term and long-term, relative to that station and others. And by the way, the short-term will be in front of council within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I think, something like that. So it's very short-term. And then you'll hear from our wonderful fire chief, Chief Blackshire. He's going to review with you sort of the analytical way that the entire system is put together to protect, every neighborhood in Palo Alto. And he'll definitely address Station 4 as well as other stations where there have been changes over the years. Okay, maybe I'll hold this thing so I can get closer. There we go. That's the first time I've gotten applause in a long time. So anyway, he'll go over Station 4 and also other stations that have been moved over the years based on the needs. And he'll address both medical emergencies and fire emergencies, because that is 100% part of the job. I just want to say I just feel we have an extraordinary chief, and Chief Blackshire. He's been a firefighter in Palo Alto for 27 years and has been the chief for 7 years. He's widely respected by our city council and our staff, and maybe most importantly by his staff for the leadership that he brings to the job, and his knowledge and his professionalism, his management skills, and by the way, he is one great human being. So I'm really glad that he's our leader in the city. So after these two gentlemen speak, you can address questions to them. Also to Public Works Director Brad Eggleston, who's here, and Assistant Director Holly, I knew I'd get that wrong, Holly Boyd, sitting right next to him. And of course, to me, today or thereafter. I only want to address one issue on this in this session, sort of on behalf of council, although I'm the spokesperson. But some of the incoming comments over the weeks have basically suggested that council really doesn't seem to be investing in fire service, and I just want to correct that misconception. Got a couple of statistics here. Certainly since 2021, post-pandemic, councils from then on, see Pat Burt's in the room, was very active on this, of building back and building up fire staff and infrastructure, both from the perspective of number of staff as well as salaries. So today we have 114 full-time equivalents. That's the most staff we've had in 10 years. So we are not underestimating, we're not underinvesting. Another stat for you is that this year we authorized $55 million in our budget for fire safety alone, separately when we talk about police and emergency services. That's a 57% increase since 2020. Or if you want to go back even further, it's 115% increase since back in 2015, 10 years ago. So council has been, and I believe will be, completely committed to funding public safety needs in our city, and I just wanted to call that out for clarity. So just two ground rules for the next hour. First is that we have a 1 hour hard stop for some other meetings after this. But in that regard, please be considerate to all your neighbors. Share the time so that we can get, hopefully, everybody heard and listened to. And if somebody is already said what you're going to say, you can just say +1 with Mr. Smith, and we can move on. And the only other thing is, be nice. Okay. So I will now first introduce our city manager, Ed Shikata.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Well, appreciate the applause there. It's very rare for me to get applause as well, so I appreciate that. You can refer to me tonight as the other Ed, as I've learned to accommodate as our new mayor has taken over. So I get to give you a bit of a budget briefing, and some of this information, actually, sorry, let me get organized here. This is actually fresh information because as we speak to where we are budgetarily, we just this evening put out our latest report, as the mayor mentioned, related to what we refer to as our mid-year budget update. So on February 24th, the City Council will review our mid-year budget, which is typically just a status report. City runs on an annual budget from July to June. And so here we are a little after the first of the year, but it allows us to have up-to-date statistics on where we are in terms of revenues and expenditures. And so as a part of that February 24th item, mid-year budget, the City Council will receive a recommendation from me and really from the administration overall to add a position to the fire department that you'll hear more about from our fire chief, but reflects the ability to add an additional staff position to Fire Station 4, and as such have what is referred to as a cross-staffed fire engine along with the medic unit ambulance that is currently at Station 4 here at Meadow and Middlefield. So what that will do is allow us, and it will be at a net increase of cost of about $300,000 really for the remainder of the fiscal year from roughly this point, or the time it'll take to ramp that up until the end of June. Equivalent to about $1 million a year that will be incorporated into our budget for the next year. So that said, this mid-year budget is really typically just a check-in, but this position is being added out of recognition of the feedback we've heard. We've heard the concerns. We appreciate that this is an urgent issue and one, again, that we believe the council will be comfortable approving. Now, that said, the budget picture overall is reviewed and will be reviewed again in the upcoming months for adoption of the new fiscal year budget in June. So that's really where the ongoing larger, longer term strategies are considered and steps taken in order to adjust staffing on a go-forward basis. That's important mainly or largely because it is the time where we get to take a look at the overall funding picture. And I will tell you that walking into the upcoming budget cycle, our latest estimates are for somewhere in excess of a $10 million deficit. And so while we will continue to look at both the revenues and where we can be most efficient in expenditures, need to understand that that is the picture going into the new fiscal year. So again, we recognize this is a priority, but just want to ensure that everyone is aware of the fiscal picture. You know, the sales tax in particular has not kept up with the levels that I think we've all been hoping for coming out of COVID. And as I'm sure everyone knows, in particular after the first of the year, we are in a very volatile environment in terms of what will be happening economically. So again, while we're taking these near-term steps, really want to set expectation that leading up to June will be the opportunity for an overall consideration of next steps for staffing for the next fiscal year and beyond. So that's really my information at this point. Certainly we'll be happy to participate in questions that you are likely to have, but in any case, at this point, let me turn it over to our fire chief to speak specifically about the fire service.
Thank you. Well, good evening. Again, my name is Gio Blackshire, fire chief here in Palo Alto. And before I get started on some of the details, I first want to thank some people. I want to thank the leadership in the city, the council, and city manager. I also want to thank the fire department team, the entire staff, from administration to prevention to suppression. And most of all, I want to thank you for being here, for taking the time to be present, even in this weather, to make your voices be heard. Clearly, this is an important issue for you, and I couldn't ask for more from a community that's engaged, that really cares about not only yourself, but this is a community effort. So you're really concerned about the community at large, and giving me an opportunity to provide some clarity and some assurance that we're here to do the best job we can with the resources that we're given, and we always have. So first I want to start off with one word in particular, and that's priority. And I have priorities as the fire chief to make sure that the system of the fire department serves the entire system, or the entire city. There's no consideration on like which area is better served than the other. And I'll talk a bit about our standards, but I want to assure you that there's no particular part of the city that's safer than the other. And I know that that's why we're here to talk about that, but I'll tell you how we got there and how I'm making this claim with confidence. Because anything that we do operationally has to come with a sense of confidence that we can meet or exceed the expectations of the community. So I made some notes, and let me start with, in talking about the priority, we've been talking about this issue of the lack of a fire engine at Fire Station 4 for quite some time. I first briefed the council in the fiscal year 23 budget hearings, where I talked about the whole situation, how we got here, and the impacts that it has. I addressed it again in the last fiscal year budget hearing, and I also talked about it in November of 24 at the Finance Committee, and presenting options on how we can not only shore up the engine back at Station 4, but also a 12-hour ambulance to meet the service demands of EMS as well as fire risk. So the first thing I want to do, and I'm going to move at a pace that allows questions, because I see a lot of papers in your hands, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions, so I'm really trying to be clear, but also concise in this briefing. So I want to talk about the resources in Palo Alto and the fire department, and I'm trying to go off of what I've seen online and the kind of the trends that were in questions, and so I could provide clarification. And one issue that came up often was the difference between a fire engine and a fire truck. I've been reading messages that say people want a fire truck at the new fire station, or at the fire station currently, versus a fire engine. I've heard a fire engine and a fire truck. I heard a fire engine, a fire truck, and an ambulance. And so just so you know, the fire engine is the apparatus that generally responds on pretty much all calls for service in the city. That goes for medical, fire alarms, service calls, hazmat, I mean, you name it, that fire engine generally goes to all those calls. They're generally the first one to get there because of the way they're located throughout the city. And then you have the fire truck. Now we have one fire truck, and that is a very special apparatus. That is more commonly known as a ladder truck. And the ladder truck has a 110-foot ladder on it, a host of other ladders, a cache of extrication tools and rescue tools and water evacuation tools, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very specialized piece of equipment, but it's very big, and the crew on there is specially trained. It is very common for a city of our size to have one truck. Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Redwood City, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, Milpitas, all have one truck. The good thing about Palo Alto is in our automatic aid response, that means whenever there's a confirmed structure fire in Palo Alto, the fire truck in Mountain View automatically comes to provide aid. So we get 2 fire trucks on every confirmed structure fire in Palo Alto, including a battalion chief from Mountain View, and that battalion chief is part of the incident command system and provides support, generally safety officers. So that we're just trying to make the scene more effective with personnel and safer with that safety officer. So they're automatically responding to fires in Palo Alto. And the big question is, why Station 4 and how we got there? So Fire Station 4 was originally staffed with 1 engine. And then in 2016, and this was when I was the operations chief, well, actually after I was the operations chief, we had a different fire chief at the time, there was this idea of cross-staffing. And fire engines throughout the city were cross-staffed with engines. There were 3 stations that were cross-staffed with engines. There was one 24-hour ambulance. So Station 1 downtown had a committed ambulance, and we had multiple fire stations that cross-staffed an engine with an ambulance. And then even at night, we had the medic unit at Station 1 cross-staff with an engine at night. And so when COVID came, and I'm skipping around again in the interest of time, but when COVID came, we had some reductions, and we had to decide, how do we manage, or how do we accommodate the demands for us to reduce our budget, but at the same time provide the level of service that, again, can meet our standard. And so outside of the 5 positions that we had to determine if we're gonna eliminate, we had to do more. That wasn't quite enough. So we had to, as you may have read, we had to brown out a fire station. And that station was Station 2. That's in College Terrace. So brownout means that if a certain amount of personnel don't show up that day, we just take it out of service. And that engine, that fire station was browned out 83% of the time during that period. So 83% of the time, that fire station had no one in it, because and you're probably saying, well, why that station and why not another station? So we have this program that does predictive modeling. And what that does is we can take all the incidents that we ran the previous year, and we can apply that to a model that we're considering and say, how would all the calls that we ran last year look if we modeled it this way? And so that model gives us confidence on how we would be able to respond. You may recall when Fire Station 3 was being rebuilt, and they were gonna tear down the fire station. And the big question was, where is the fire engine gonna go? We had 2 options. We had an option that was right down the street from the station, which would have kept that fire engine right within that neighborhood. And the other option was at Fire Station 1 downtown. And we went up before council and made the 2 proposals. And ultimately, the community wanted the engine to be downtown. And it seems farther away, but we were okay with that because the model that we ran gave us confidence that even though it's farther away, it can still get to that neighborhood within our response time standard, and I'll talk more about that. So we used that, we've been using that predictive modeling. Again, it's not perfect because it's predictive, but it actually gives us a control group that gives confidence. It shows that if we ran around the same amount of calls the year before, we would be able to meet our standard. So let's talk about, let me see. Let's talk about cross-staffing. So cross-staffing is a model where you would have 1 crew in the fire station, and depending on the call, that fire crew will go on that appropriate call. So if it's a medical call that needs transport, they will jump on the ambulance and go on that call. And then if it's a fire call, like a fire alarm, a structure fire, a car accident, depending, they would get on the fire engine and go on that call. Now again, we've done this before, and I've said on the record, if you go watch the videos from either council budget hearing or the meeting in November, there are challenges with cross-staffing, and it's not the perfect model, but it does solve some of the issues that we have in this regard. When we changed our model at the, so during COVID, We were still cross-staffing. We had to brown out a fire station at Station 2, and we had to figure out how we can better serve the community because that fire station had no one in it 83% of the time. And so I gave direction to the staff. I said, we need to remodel this operations deployment, and there's 3 things that I was asking. 1, I want to make sure that we can meet our response time standard of 8 minutes or less 90% of the time. 2, I want to have a fire resource in every fire station so there are no stations that are browned out anymore. And the 3rd one was I wanted to remove cross-staffing because that did provide challenges, especially in that climate right after COVID when we were doing reductions. And the current model that we are running is the outcome of that. There's a fire department resource in every fire station. We are no longer browning out any fire station, so College Terrace has their engine or their resources, and there's no more cross-staffing. So we accomplished that. And it was, you know, again, as a result, there's no fire engine in Station 4. Now you're saying, well, why Station 4? Once again, when I gave the direction to the fire staff to figure those 3 bullet points out, we had to once again take the calls from the previous year, put them into that model, and say, how can we make sure we meet that response time standard, and that this is the outcome. And it was appropriate because, as you may have heard me say before, and just to make a correction, I never said that the fire engines at Fire Station 3 on Embarcadero and Station 5 in Barron Park can get to a incident in Station 4's district at the same time. It can clearly, if there was a fire engine there, it can get there faster. That goes without saying. But the goal was to make sure that we get there within our response time standard. And that's throughout the city. Everything we do has to have a reflection of that response time within the city, not in a particular district. And so, that being said, let me see. So that's how we got here. And there are some challenges with cross-staffing. The challenges are that it does take an additional resource out of service. So for example, there's a crew there and they run on a medical call with the ambulance. Well, there's the fire engine is still there, and technically it's out of service because the crew cannot fulfill that apparatus. Conversely, if there's a fire engine call and they jump on that ambulance is sitting there without a crew, unable to deploy the calls. That's one of the challenges. Another one of the challenges is that, let me see. Yeah, so something that I talked about on the record also is that cross-staffing is not a very innovative model in the fire service. It is very common, and we actually cross-staff quite a few apparatus. We have an air light unit at Fire Station 2 that we cross-staff with the engine crew there, and we have wildland rigs that are cross-staffed with engine company crews, et cetera. So typically, those units are cross-staffed with an apparatus that's not tremendously busy. This, on the other hand, medical calls being almost 70% of the call volume in the city, that means that it's going to be out of service more. So right now, the ambulance is utilized 20% of the time. That means throughout a 24-hour period, the ambulance is busy on an incident, on a call, transporting, et cetera, 20% of the time. In this cross-staffing model, that means that the engine would be available to respond about 80% of the time. So that means that it's not 100%, but it's 80%. So that's where, but again, without being able to predict, you don't know what call's coming in, but looking at how we usually run, that's where the confidence comes from. And if you look at the most recent fires that were spoken of, there was the one at AJ's Cleaners, and there was the one on Janus a few weeks ago. And the first unit to respond on those fires was Medic 64. That is the ambulance at Station 4. If we were cross-staffing at the time of those fires, that crew would have been on an engine and would have been the first unit on scene. So again, that's how this model works. I would also like to say that Another challenge is, call volume is increasing. It's high, it just goes up every year. But an ambulance is appropriate at that station also because 73% of the emergencies in that neighborhood are medical emergencies. And so medical emergencies are what we call high frequency, high risk. It's a lot of them and they can be catastrophic. Structure fires are low frequency, high risk. That means about 1% of less than 1% of our calls are actually structure fires, as opposed to just under 70% of medical emergencies. So that's something to keep in mind also. We also have to be mindful of our role as being the only fire department in the county that runs an ambulance service that has control of how we transport patients here. And when all those units are used up, we rely on Santa Clara County Ambulance. Now, the standard for response times for an ambulance in the county is 12 minutes or less 90% of the time to get an ambulance on scene. Palo Alto fire ambulances meet that standard 88% of the time. So 88% of the time we have an ambulance on scene in under 12 minutes. In 2024, county ambulance is 30 minutes or less 90% of the time. That's a tremendously long time. So we feel it's very important to make sure that we have ambulances available in the city as much as possible, especially in a neighborhood where 73% of the calls are medical. And so going back to the 8 minutes or less 90% of the time, and I saw some questions like, why 8 minutes? Where did that come from? Did you just make it up? So I'll give you a quick briefing on why 8 minutes or less 90% of the time. So 8 minutes or less is part of what we call the chain of survival. It has been determined by multiple agencies like American Health Association and others that you can get optimal results from an emergency response if you get to the patient within 8 minutes or less. Generally associated with cardiac events, but that could be more than just cardiac events. And you're saying, well, why is that the same standard for a structure fire? Well, in structure fires, the most important thing are the people that might be inside that are affected that need to be rescued. So that 8 minutes applies. Now, it depends. So it depends on, not all agencies in the county have adopted a standard. We adopted a standard because we want a goal to meet. Also, all the fire agencies that have adopted response times, as you may have seen in the LAFCO report that was released, is that none of us are making our times completely because it's very challenging. There's different call types, how busy you are. We talk about unit hour utilization, and that's talking about how many units can run simultaneous calls. And that's the benefit of having more resources, as you can have more, you can run more calls at the same time, you can respond at the same time, which is why is it a priority to make sure that we pursue having this full-time engine and that 12-hour ambulance, which is what I talked about in November. So that's still a priority. So I'm just trying to give context to why that standard stands as 8 minutes or less 90% of the time. So that's the goal that we try to achieve. To get that ambulance there 88% of the time on a medical call to transport that patient in Palo Alto is tremendous. And we really don't want to rely too much on county, who's 30 minutes or less 90% of the time in 2024. Now, I also want to mention we measure in percentiles, not averages. Averages is not acceptable because we don't want to be an average, meet our goal at the average time. We want to make sure that most of our customers get that same level. So we measure in percentiles. So that's the difference between averages and percentile. So we can ensure that most of the responses we do are in that as opposed to the average. Because if one's 1 minute and one's 11 minutes, then the average is in the middle. We don't want that. We want to make sure that we're way at the top. And how are we doing on time? Okay, it's about 30 minutes. Let me move through this real quick. How do we, okay, I'll get to that, I promise you. Thank you so much for asking though. And that's why I'm trying to hurry, because I really want to hear what you have to say and what I'm not answering. I want to make sure that you have the forum to ask these questions. Okay, so in response times, there's three things that measure response times. You look at it and you'll say, well, how long does it take for us to get there? So the first part of the response time is call processing. That's the time that it takes once the dispatcher picks up the phone, takes the call, gets the information, puts it in the computer, and alerts the first responder that there's an emergency. That's called call processing. And then there's turnout time. Turnout time is the time that the firefighter hears the alarm, and then the wheels are turning on the apparatus, whether it's the engine, the truck, or the ambulance, et cetera. That's that time that they hear the alarm till the wheels are turning. And then there's travel time. The travel time is the time that we start turning wheels to the time that we get to the incident. And so in 23, we were 9 minutes and 40 seconds, 90% of the time for all calls in the city. Now we're down to 9 minutes and 9 seconds. I'm telling you, that is a tremendous improvement. I know it only sounds like seconds, but when you're talking about the 90th percentile, seconds matter. I mean, we try to shave seconds. If we can shave 5 seconds, that is a huge success. I know it sounds minute, but when you're talking about response times in the sense of percentiles, it's tremendous. So we're still trying to make those calls. And you have to imagine, if you get a medical call, I can go on a medical call in this, and when I get there, I can throw on some gloves and other protective equipment. But when it's a structure fire, you have to take this off, put on bunker gear, put on your jacket, you have to put on a whole different type of PPE, so it takes a little bit longer. And some fire departments have different standards for different type of calls, but this just, it depends on the department. But just to give you an idea that a response time standard is not this hard, fast, this is what it is for everyone, we have to meet it. And even in NFPA, there's different time standards for different calls, and there's some explanation for that also. But I just want to make sure that you understand that when you hear a response time and how long it takes to get there, it's not just driving. There are several components that we also don't have control over, like the train that's passing through town. Okay, lastly, just to let you know so the fire station that's going to be rebuilt. And you may have questions about this, but I want to let you know that when the fire station was first designed, it was designed to pretty much the way it is now, to just accommodate 3 personnel to staff an engine, or an ambulance in this case. But it was designed with 3 dorms. And trying to be progressive and forecast what may be coming and to meet the service demand, I talked to the city manager and said, hey, I think we really need to reconsider the design, because there's no place on the south side of town to house an ambulance. Not Station 5 at Barron Park, and surely not the fire station that we currently have at Station 4 to do an ambulance and an engine. And after certain talks about design, budget, et cetera, got the green light to, let's make sure that we have resources on the south end of town. And now that fire station is being designed with 5 dorms and can accommodate both a fire engine and an ambulance. So that'll be the only station on the south end of town that can accommodate both a fire engine and an ambulance. So once again, trying to cover the whole city and not deprive, because right now there's no place, if we said let's staff an engine and an ambulance right now, we have nowhere to put them on the south end of town. So that's kind of really thinking forward on how the service demand is and may increase over time. Do I have anything else on the fire station? You know what? I'm going to stop now because I really want to hear what you have to say, and we have other people that can add to this conversation. So is it okay if we just take a break now? Okay, we have multiple mics. So Megan has a microphone, and we have one here. And let's start taking questions. And again, if I didn't cover anything, I'll be happy to answer your questions now. Thank you.
So I'll just start right up here.
Alan Markham from Midtown. What are the staffing options? You mentioned one, but if we don't go with that option, what are the other options that are being discussed, and what are the financial implications of those?
Great question. So we presented 3 options to the Finance Committee in November. And again, this was a phase-in plan that would both put an ambulance, a 12-hour ambulance, so just 12 hours when it's busy during the day. So that would be 4 ambulances that we would have. Again, really trying to be self-reliant on our own ambulances and really trying not to impact the rest of the county with the needs for ALS. And then it would be a fire engine. So the 3 plans were contract an ambulance like a private contract and staff the fire engine with firefighters. The second one was to staff, it was a single role model, and the single role model is where we would have civilians on our ambulances, and the firefighters that are on the ambulances would then move over to the fire engine at Fire Station 4 and put that in service. And the third what was the third option? It's slipping my mind. And then overtime. That was the third model that we presented, that would be overtime to staff those units up.
And where does the cross-staffing come in?
So on the models that we proposed to the Finance Committee in November did not include cross-staffing. So this was not part of the plan. If you go back and watch the meeting, there's no mention of, matter of fact, it's actually, alternatively, we're trying to say we don't want to go back to cross-staffing because of the challenges that I said. But in the interest of the demand right now, and it's like, what can we do right now to get this thing in service? That's a reasonable, feasible, cost-effective, time-efficient solution. And that solution is a cross-staff unit. And I won't backtrack on anything that I said when it came to the challenges. If you go back and watch those meetings, I did have concerns about cross-staffing. But again, right now, today, as we speak, there is no fire engine at Fire Station 4. It's not there. Cross-staffing model, it would be there right now. I don't think Medic 64 is on the call right now. But we could check. But my point is that with this cross-staff model, that is not the ideal solution long-term. But it's a model that will work. It'll put an engine in that station. It'll be available 80% of the time, while the ambulance is available, is running calls 20% of the time. And so that is why we're proposing this, because it's time. We can do it quick. If we said, you know, put 10 firefighters, hire 10 firefighters and put them on that engine, it takes quite some time for that process. We have to go through a recruitment, application process. We have to do job offers. Then there's backgrounds, physicals, there's a 20+ week academy, then there's another 4 to 6 week in-house academy, and then they're online. So if we were to hire 10 firefighters to put that in service, it would probably be January of 26 till we see that in service. So again,
They also wouldn't fit, Chief, in the current.
I'm sorry?
They also wouldn't fit in the current station. So if
Correct.
the idea was to have them at Station 4, there's just not the physical accommodation.
Correct. Yeah, so we couldn't at this time put an engine and an ambulance at Fire Station 4. There's just no room for them right now. So it will be either or. So if you say we want our engine back, well then you're going to lose that ambulance to help run 70% of the medical calls in this district. With the fires are the low frequency, high risk type call type.
Chief Blackshire, Al Dorsky of Adobe Meadow. A technical question about the response time in your predictive model. You said it's about 8 minutes, 9 minutes or so. Does that take into account things like the equipment coming from Barron Park or the other fire station, crossing the train tracks and traffic?
So actually, I'm gonna hand it over to Deputy Chief McNally over there in a moment. But I want to make sure that when I talk about this department running as a system, when there's an emergency in wherever it is in the city, that unit's out of service, and the next due unit is the one that's closest. And sometimes that unit's on the call, and sometimes that unit's on the call. Sometimes all of our ambulances are busy, and there's very few resources in the city. So that's why it's 90, the percentile is 8 minutes or less 90% of the time, because 10% of that time, there's gonna be those times where the resources just are not available. So let me give it to Chief McNally to talk about predictive modeling.
Thank you. Just to kind of keep it high level, when we go through predictive modeling, we'll usually take 3 or 4 years worth of data. We'll implement into a system that allows us to trial and error, if you will, moving apparatus from place to place. It uses both Google Maps as well as historical response time data, and it will take into account. Now, is there a chance that a response from 3 might be quicker based on the fact that there was a train coming through? Certainly, but the train delays that are already in the system and the traffic delays that are already in the system are factored in based on time of day, based on the incidents that had happened with the original modeling that was in place. We'll run it through the basic iterations of those models along with what was currently being deployed at the time of those calls and see what the difference is.
Thank you. You said that there 90% of it is within 8 minutes to 9 minutes. Where are the sites? Where in the city isn't beyond 8 minutes to 9 minutes? Where is it slower than 8 minutes to 9 minutes? Where in the city is where city is the response slower than 8 or 9 minutes?
So the time.
The heat map of that. Also, we respond also to Mountain View. They respond to us. We respond also to Mountain View.
Correct. So we can get that information, correct? Yeah, we can get it. We can get a heat map of that. But that number, again, that's a citywide response. We don't, again, we can create a heat map, but the number I gave you is all 9,800 calls that we ran last year, and not just in one particular neighborhood. But we can look at that, and we can get that information online. Right. Yes, yeah, we can get it. As a matter of fact, we will be releasing our annual report, and we can put that heat map in the annual report. That'll be out. We're shooting for March. By time, response. Sure, we can do that. We can absolutely do that. Thank you for asking.
Hi, my name's Captain Jackson, retired with the City of Palo Alto. I've been working here over, 30 years and retired. I'm also worked in Yosemite National Park as a fire management officer. This city is an urban forest. Last week, you saw LA burn. There is no statistical data can tell you when a fire is gonna burn. The house next door to you can burn tomorrow or tonight. You can listen to all these models, but it doesn't predict a fire. That's the bottom line. I've responded from Station 4 within 2 minutes to Eichler, where the patient, actually the little elderly lady, was in her back room when the fire lit off. She was cooking and went in the back, and she discovered that the house was on fire. She didn't have the time. She only had time to call 911, and the dispatcher called us. We were dressed, ready to go in 2 minutes, and at her door in 3. And she eventually died from her burns. She had 100% third-degree burns from that fire. That's how quick a fire goes through. You talk 8 minutes, you're talking 3 Eichlers on fire. 2 minutes is 1 Eichler extending into another house. So you can listen to all these models you want, but the real world is you need Engine 4, because Engine 4 out of service, 5 has to come into your district. And you got your JCC, that high-density building with all those elderly people. They have no protection. 1 engine, Mountain View, if they're not on a call, they already burned down we had joint dispatches, mutual aid, but they said, your city isn't protecting and coming into our city and helping us. You're using us to protect your city. So it's about time that we spend the money and get fire protection full-time in this city. When I left in 2011, the city was, fire department, we had Keene as the mayor who had it out for the fire department, destroyed the fire department. We lost our hazardous materials rescue. And that took care of Tesla, everybody, Hewlett-Packard. We were responding to Stanford with all the hazardous materials. And we lost that because of staffing decreasing. We need our hazardous materials rig back too for the city. We got Tesla vehicles burning up around the city. That's gonna be causing house fires too as they age. So you might wanna consider on taking the time and keep on writing your city council and fighting for your rights. Your city deserves the best fire protection. Mountain View has a class 1 fire protection. We don't, we have class 2 because we've lost all our resources. So I want you all to get in there and fight for it. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Maurice Green. I'd like to raise 2 quick points. Number one, the state is imposing very large housing demands upon this city. Many of that is going to be high-rise buildings. I asked Captain Jackson, how high does our tiller truck go? He said 5 floors. And when I look at the designs for a 7 and 8-story building, I wonder what's going to happen to the people on those top 3 floors. Are we planning for that? Do we have a way to plan for that kind of future in this city? The second thing I want to do is invite everybody here to come back right here to this El Palo Alto room on Saturday, March 1st at 1 o'clock. And there will be a town hall meeting sponsored by PAZ and by California Institute for Local Control to discuss the fire hazards and the CEQA hazards, the coastal hazards, and how they relate to the housing problems facing the state.
Did you want me to? Okay, so real quick, when it comes to high rises, there's the ladder truck that we have is 110 feet. And depending on where the fire, let's just say if there was a rescue, depending on where that rescue is, depending how close the truck can get to that building, because there's a setback, and that's why it's at an angle. So the most important unit you can have respond to a high-rise fire is a fire engine, because they have water, they have the means to take the hose, to pump the system with water, to keep that fire maintained or as much as possible, because putting out the fire is indirect rescue. And so as you see, whether it's San Francisco, Palo Alto, Stanford campus, you're not going to find ladder trucks that can reach the top of those buildings. What's important is that we have a very effective and engaged fire prevention team that makes sure that when buildings are built, that they meet these fire codes. And actually, many of what we require of people building in Palo Alto are more strict than what the state offers for that reason. Because again, the most important thing we could do is keep the buildings safe and give people a means of getting out and giving us a means to pump and get water in there and indirectly save. But the ladder trucks are helpful on only up to a certain amount of levels. Again, it could be 5, it could be 8, depending on the building. But again, there's enough high rises around that ladder trucks aren't expected to reach the top of high rises. It's the code enforcement that really applies. Thank you.
And perhaps, if I might, Chief, just to elaborate for those who aren't familiar with the types of building features that he's referring to, it's the sprinklers, it's the design of the elevators, it's the standpipes that provide water within the buildings themselves. So there are a number of changes that have happened over years to the building codes that reduce the severity of fires should they actually happen in high rises. Thanks, Chief.
Hi, I'm Penny Olson. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. First of all, I want to say thank you. We really value the service of our fire department and emergency responders. So, sorry. I just wanted to say that first. And I also want to appreciate all the comments everybody's saying here. But one question I have is we're entering this particular quadrant of South Palo Alto is entering a period of a lot of high density construction, not just in our portion of South Palo Alto, this southeast quadrant, but also Mountain View is planning a lot of high density development just on their side of our border. So we're going to be seeing a lot of this. And I've been doing some research on construction periods, and I hear what you're saying about the wonderful new codes that are in place. Thank you for that. But I'm worried about the construction period. I mean, there was, the big fire at 2700 Middlefield that happened on the border of Redwood City and Menlo Park was an 8-alarm fire using 11 fire engines, in response. And I'm curious how we're planning forward. I see us looking backward at last year's data, but how are we planning for this future and the immediate future, the construction period that's already started? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Penny, for that comment and question. How are we preparing? So So there's this plan called the Mutual Aid Plan, the Santa Clara County Mutual Aid Plan. And that is an agreement between the cities that show how we will assist and provide mutual aid when needed. For example, that's in Redwood City, they don't have, I don't even think they have 8 engines. They have what, 5? Yeah, but she said it was an 8-alarm fire, so it had 8 engines. We had more than that. But what they even had to use multiple agencies' resources to fight that fire. So what we do is we have a team that works under the Santa Clara County Fire Chiefs Association, operations, training, et cetera, that makes sure that we're all prepared to not only respond within the county, which is the primary, but also outside of the county. That's when you see the strike teams go out to these other communities around the state that help. So we all have limited resources, even San Jose, as big as they are, and Santa Clara County Fire, they also need aid when they have certain level fires. So what we do is we meet every year, we make sure that plan is valid, we train to the plan to make sure that resources are available when needed. And when we have, if we have a drawdown in our city for a fire, there's a plan in place where the dispatchers know to communicate with the county and bring resources to back up the city, because emergencies are still gonna happen while others emergencies happen. So if your question is how do we prepare for something like that, it's the mutual aid plan. I don't know if that's answering your question.
If I could add to that also, Chief, and the example in Redwood City is a recent one, but actually dating back to those who might remember Santana Row, when that fire occurred back in 2002, 2003. I think it was 2003. And another example, so even a city as large as San Jose heavily relied on mutual aid as the way to really respond to a major fire, a major incident like that. Now, following the Santana Row fire, it took more than 10 years, but we now are part of what's called the Silicon Valley Interoperability Authority. All of the fire agencies have common radio systems, so that facilitates the ability to respond to major incidents across agencies so they can talk to each other. That applies to the police as well as to fire. That's a really important point, because as the chief points out, no single agency is able to handle an incident after it reaches a certain size. And so this interoperability, the ability to back up among agencies, is an integral, it's really a designed part of how we respond to major incidents. Thanks, Chief. Oh, and I'm sorry, one last point to your point. The chief already pointed out that Fire Station 4 is being designed for growth. It's being designed for a larger crew than currently could be housed at the existing Station 4. And that was an explicit decision as a part of the planning for this new station that will be constructed in order to allow greater capacity here in South Palo Alto.
So the follow-up question would be, during the construction period, a lot of work goes on. I mean, obviously sprinkler systems aren't working then, generally, and the things that help to squelch a fire before the engine arrives, and the things that can happen to increase a fire, the likelihood of a fire also happen. There's hot work, welding, soldering, things like that going on, cooking on site for the workers. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on these sites. Sometimes there's a problem with arson. I've been reading some reports on this. The likelihood of a fire during construction is actually greater. And a serious fire is actually greater. So that first responding truck is really important that it gets there fast. I appreciate that we're going to get all this backup service from elsewhere, yay. But that first response is critically important, and I'm a little worried about the cross-staffing for that reason during this time. I mean, I think the short-term plan for construction needs to include full staffing for the engine. I don't know how we evaluate that. I'm not a fire professional, but I would ask you, how do you evaluate that risk given the level of construction we're about to see?
Understood. Very valid. I mean, that is, structures are very vulnerable during construction, because we don't have the same fire protective systems installed, obviously, because it's in the process of being built. So just to keep in mind, we talked about this earlier, is that first-in engine in any district, as we speak, in any city providing services, is not always available to respond in that district. It could be on another call, it could be in training, it could be on an emergency, the engines don't sit there waiting to respond just for fires in that district. We are a complete system. Sometimes we have engines going all the way across the city to respond to a call because those engines are busy. So and that's why I try to put emphasis on the system. There's no guarantee that a unit's going to be available all the time for that particular emergency. That's just the way the fire service runs. We have to respond to emergencies. And the common phrase is the call you're on is the call you're on, which means if it's a medical emergency and I hear another medical call come in, you can't abandon that patient to run that call. We're on this call and the next in unit. Now, if another unit comes in, now maybe the captain could say, okay, now we have 2 units on this call. We're going to take that one because we're closer. You have to stay with this one. But that's the kind of complexities run within running an emergency response. So you're totally valid, and it needs to be considered on how we. Understood.
I just want to note, I think we hear what your question is, and we'll note that. There are other people that are in line that would like to ask questions. I think we could take 2 more.
Okay, I do want to directly address the issue of construction because, again, the fire chief mentioned this, but I think it's easy to not appreciate the work of our Fire Prevention Bureau, and that is under the direction of Chief Blackshire, but Tamara Jasso is our fire marshal, and when you hear about the Palo Alto process and developers unhappy with the time it takes to get through permitting and inspection, not to throw blame, but often it involves the fire department because they are very scrupulous in terms of ensuring standards and inspections of construction sites as they are proceeding. And it is an integral part of the work that the fire department does to prevent the incidents from occurring, both with, whether it's hazardous materials, flammable materials, as well as the nature of the work that's being done. I think that's important to note.
Hi, I'm Xiaolin Liao. I'm a resident in this place just down the road on Middlefield Road, across from the fire engine house for 30 years. Thank you for the first responders. I had a home delivery, and the fire truck and the medical emergency came within 2 minutes. But that was 30 years ago, and we had both the fire engine and the medical emergency truck. Right now, we do need to staff a fire engine. If we, I missed it. If we are upgrading firehouse number 4, we need to make room for both the fire engine and the medical truck to be coexisting, and we need to put enough staff there. And that brings to the urgency and the importance of fire response, because just yesterday we heard from the Palisades fire. There was a first house destroyed the house. The lot was put on sale at $900,000. But if it had the house, it was 2.5 to 2.7 million. Okay. And this was an eager seller who never wants to go back, who is taking the loss, who knew any insurance would never cover that difference. So we are talking about urban forest in Palo Alto. We are talking about just any Eichler house could be $3,000. That could be easily destroyed, and all their people's lives saving and the value could be destroyed. So we need to have a very proper fire response for the quality of living we are enjoying, and for all the taxes we are paying here. And the other important thing is related to the construction. We are very happy to see the Eden House, the Mitchell Park Place coming up next to us. And I very much look forward to have one of my children to live there who has, high functioning autism. And that building is slotted for taking in 25 people with developmental disabilities, right? And I think they need fire protection. They cannot run so fast out of the stairs or elevators. We need a fire engine. Just, for the reason we are accommodating people in our community with special need, we need adequate services. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jayanth Menon. I lived in the area for my whole life. Thank you so much for keeping us all safe and for being thoughtful about our future. My question is in regards to, Ed, your first comment about the budget changes that are happening, and then Fire Chief, about the modeling that we've done. It seems like just the last question here is, what is the plan now after you've heard all of this? It sounds like there's a short-term stopgap, that there'll be perhaps room for both an ambulance and a fire engine. What do you believe is the right next step forward, given our response here today?
I'll lead off. Certainly, again, just to perhaps reiterate but reinforce that in the next 2 weeks, the City Council will have a recommendation to increase incrementally the staffing here at Station 4. Then the next opportunity will be in June. Really, actually May and June, we go through our annual budget, look at what options are available for additional enhancements.
How does your modeling of response times take into account the increasing number of cars and the increasing number of residences, like the condominiums being built near the freeway?
So one of the things we've done in the past, and we went through an accreditation process. Sorry, better? Got to hold it right there. So a few years back, we went through a process called accreditation, which a governing body comes through and really checks on what we've said we've been doing over the years. Part of that process included what's called the standards of cover. So that standards of cover assesses the risks from hazardous materials, fire, flood, any of the risks that you could think of in your community. And it takes those risks, it does, as the gentleman here was asking, it heat maps out the response times from various locations in our town, but it also builds out, based on other communities, what the expectation would be if the population increased by X, 5%, 10%, and so on. So it really builds that out in a period of time that allows us to anticipate when some of those are coming. And Chief Blackshire, when we did a lot of this modeling, was very big on us monitoring how we were doing in response, so that we knew coming forward, not, hey, it's too late, we've already exceeded our capacity, that we can see those things coming a few years in advance, so that he can speak to budget, to the city manager's office, in planning for those, so they're not last minute requests. Does that answer your question?
Last question, then we have to wrap up.
Hi, this is a question mostly about cross-staffing and cooperation with other districts. It seemed to me like if you have an ambulance call, if the fire truck and the ambulance went to the site, then if the medical emergency was not so big an emergency, then the fire truck would be ready with its staff to run off to a fire. And so maybe not 100% of the time, but another, 10 or 15% of the time, the fire truck would be available for an emergency if the ambulance was really not necessary. Number two, you mentioned cooperation within Santa Clara County, but we also border Menlo Park. How much planning is there done with Menlo Park so they can put out fires in North Palo Alto if necessary? And how much redistribution of resources are there when there's a fire? say, does Menlo Mountain View move resources closer to the border when fire trucks are busy in South Palo Alto, so they'd be ready to take care of our fires, and vice versa? Do we redistribute resources to our southern border or northern border when the other cities are occupied with fires?
Hello, there it is. Thank you for the question. So we have an auto aid agreement with 5 agencies. Mountain View, we have one with Menlo Park. As you said, we have an auto aid agreement with Menlo Park, Mountain View, Santa Clara County, and CAL FIRE and Woodside Fire Protection District. So those 5 agencies that are all around Palo Alto, we have agreements with on response. When it comes to resources, so when we activate, we call County Com to let them know that we're working. It's called the RedNet. It's a technical term, but whenever we need resources through a mutual aid request, we call County Com, and they already have like a matrix of resources that say, okay, if Palo Alto is short resources in a particular area, we will grab resources from another agencies to fill that gap. And at every fire station, we have like a box for those resources to come in so they can get access to everything they would need to house at that fire station until they're relieved. And it goes for every single city in the county. They have, there's a plan to fill resources in once the dispatchers call the RedNet and say, we need more resources because we're all tapped out. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to the chief and his 2 capable assistant chiefs. And as the chief said, thanks to you for being active about this and bringing it to our attention. And thanks to the city manager as well. Some people will stay around and take more questions individually, but thanks for showing up.